The people were moving along the river, as people do in the gentle days, moving from one fruitful place to the other. Maid played the flute, first a river song, then a berry song, then both mixed together. And it was so flowing that the people began to laugh and shout. Resh slapped his chest and called out the names of the fathers and the deeds, and it all flowed so well that we almost didn't see the old woman in the thorn flower bushes. She was an old crone, huddled up in the bushes, naked and covered with cuts. All the music fell away at once, and the people gathered around to take a look. She was very old, far into the barren years, maybe even into the years of being carried. I did not like the look of her right away. She did not have a face of the fathers and the people, but rather the hungry, untrusting face of one of the wandering strangers that we sometimes met along the river. Even when strangers were friendly, they did not know the names of the fathers or the deeds, except for maybe a few, but they did not say them properly or with respect. Other times, they set upon the people, killing, raping, and committing all manner of hideousness. I was always glad to see them go on their way, leaving us alone with the mother river. Some of the older people tried to talk to the crone. She knew some of the names of things, but said them wrong. I went away from the crowd and looked out into the rocky land. I had a feeling that maybe she was not alone, that there were other strangers with her, ready to set upon us. The land seemed to be empty. Some of our cats were with us, crouching and sniffing around, and they seemed unworried. Still, I showed my chest and made signs of war in case anybody was among the rocks, watching us. Rima saw me making the signs and laughed at me, saying that she saw some lizards making signs of surrender. I made a few signs of courtship towards her, but with a snarling face, and she ran off, giggling. Somebody called my name. I came back to where the people were gathered. Somebody had given the crone a cloth to cover herself, and some of the women were putting good, lucky mud on her cuts. I didn't like this. Why should we waste anything on a barren old woman? Somebody called me because I was the son of Arid, one of the great men of the people. The crone had called on all the great people, the leaders of the people. She wanted to show us something. I didn't like this either. Who was this useless crone to call on all the great people? The crone was talking to the great people. The way she said the names was all wrong, but her voice was like a strong music, and her eyes were very large and powerful, and she moved her hands, making all sorts of unknown signs. The people listened to her closely, and I found myself listening with them. She said that she was the daughter of the river. She did not have a mother and a father of the flesh, but her mother was the river alone. I scoffed at this. The stories of the deeds tell us that the ancient people came from the river, but this was long ago, and they were not strangers who came from the rocky lands alongside the lizards. She went on talking, saying that she was living with the painted backs, a friendly group of strangers we had met before, but that they had been set upon by another group of strangers. The other strangers were powerful and cruel, and they carried all the painted backs off except her. This was how she ended up naked in the thorn bush. The people murmured at this. When had it happened? Just the night before. This was worrying. Maybe the other strangers were still around, waiting to set upon us. The crone asked the people to take her with us. This started more murmuring. She was a stranger, not a person, and she was an old crone. She could never become a person by birthing one of the people, nor could she work hard for the people. She was useless. Maid, the flute player, spoke up and said that we should show her the kindness of the people, the same kindness that Mother River shows to us. Are we not useless to the river who was here before us? And would we be here forever? I liked Maid, who was close kin, but he liked talking and impressing people too much. Now we were in the gentle days, and things were easy. But what would happen in the dry days, when everything needed to be saved? And who would carry the crone when she could no longer walk? The fathers did not perform the deed so that we would carry old crones around. But I did not say this because I am not good at talking, and my words would seem weak compared to Maid's, which glittered and flowed. The woman began talking in her strange way again, saying that we should take her with us because the Mother River would bless us with many things, as she was the mother's daughter. Now some of the people began to scoff like I did, saying that this was not according to the deeds. The crone agreed with this, calling these people wise, and saying that some of the deeds were secret. This started more talk, which started to lead toward argument, when the old crone suddenly strode right into the river and held her hands up and called for everybody to watch. The people became silent. The woman reached into the river, searching for something. After a moment, she pulled her hands out and showed us, dripping and shining in the sun, 3 very large river clams, waving the clams around for us to see. The old crone claimed that this was proof that she was the blessed daughter of Mother River. Many of the people snickered and muttered the names of the fathers. Everyone knew that these were the gentle days, and it was easy enough to reach into the river and pull out clams. The woman was just a filthy old trickster. We should leave her and move on. "Look," the woman cried, and she handed the clams to the great men. "Look inside." Our Uncle Kel slipped his thick yellow thumbnail into a clam's mouth and pulled it open. The people pressed around him to get a look. It was a nice clam with healthy meat, but clinging to the shell was a large, perfect pearl. The women all let out little sighs, and the men murmured. Other great men pulled open the other 2 clams, and they both held even larger pearls, all 3 perfectly round. At this, people gasped and shouted, and everyone began talking at once. A man might go a whole lifetime only seeing 1 perfect pearl pulled from the river. 3 was a thing that had never happened before. 3 was a thing which would live among the deeds. "Take her with us," one of the women cried, and soon most of the people were saying this. I found myself saying it as well. The woman was surely part of a powerful flow, and it was best not to swim against her. But even as the great men agreed that this woman would become a part of the people, and we all cheered and shouted out the names of the fathers and the deeds, I found myself looking at her strange, hungry face and wondering if she had not somehow slipped those pearls into the clams herself. You cannot quite understand the power of addiction until you have seen it firsthand, until you have seen it eat like an acid through everything you are. It is astounding to watch. Its slow and total corrosion of your entire life is mesmerizing. As you watch it, you keep thinking, at some point the corrosion will stop. There is no way it will be able to eat through this next thing. This next thing is too important to me. But then it does. It eats through everything. And you realize you are dealing with a vast and inhuman power. The most frightening thing is that consequences do not work against a well-developed addiction. There are ultimately no consequences, none, which can separate you from your drug. As your addiction progresses and your self-control slips away, there is nothing you won't risk to continue doing your drug. Nothing is important enough. Nothing is sacred enough. Money, career, marriage, home, family, goals, art, religion, dignity, safety, health, sanity, parents, children, life itself. All of it will go into play. All of it will be put on the table. If you play the game shrewdly, you might get to keep some of it. You will not get to keep all of it. You will pay. You will pay in ways that you cannot imagine. You will look at the people who have lost more than you, and you will pretend you are different than them. You will pretend that you can walk away from the table. But the time will come to walk away, and you won't. You will keep playing. You will be made a liar. If you play long enough, all your pious little promises will be shown to be lies. I have a good job. I would never risk my job. I love my wife. I would never risk my marriage. I love my children more than anything. I would never risk my children's safety. Ever. I don't want to die. Whatever specific promises you make will be the ones that you will break, because those are the ones you have made to try to control yourself. But you won't be able to control yourself. Your self-control will be pried from your grasp, like a toy being taken away from a child. And when you break these promises, you will not be some mindless junkie who doesn't care anymore. You will be in many ways the same person you are now, and you will know how awful and horrifying your actions are, and you will do them anyway. You will not be able to believe what is happening to you. You will tell yourself that you are unlucky or cursed. You will watch in horror, but what you are watching is yourself. The horror is what you are doing. I realize that this all sounds rather silly and dramatic. From the perspective of somebody dabbling with drugs, this all sounds laughably overwrought. But if you ever go where I have been, if you ever see what I have seen, this will still sound laughable. Not because it is overwrought, but because it is insufficient. Because it doesn't even begin to describe it. To hunt prey, to taste righteous lifeblood, you must simply become an ordinary part of the world. Look around. What is happening right now? Nothing at all. Yet the leaves rustle, the grass sways, the birds call, the gnats dance. All of this is just a part of the world. If you become a part of the world, you become nothing at all. You become invisible. If you are not a part of the world becomes 10,000 things. This is misfortune. It is easy enough to become invisible if you stay still, if you hide. But staying still and hiding aren't enough to catch prey. You must seek and strive. How do you seek and strive while remaining an ordinary part of the world? How do you exert your will without disrupting the world? How do you move along with the will of the world? This is the mystery of hunting. This is the mystery of subtlety. This is the greatest of all mysteries. Consider the mouse. It is moving through the leaves, looking for food. You must not disturb it. Do as little as possible. Wait. Watch and listen. If it moves away, move with it. Follow it. If it moves closer, stay still. Practice non-interference. Let it come. It should be thinking happy thoughts of food and comfort when you strike. When you snare it in your claws, do not eat it right at once. Let it struggle and give up its lifeblood. Practice non-action. You need not kill it. Let it die. To be subtle is to move with the will of the world. Do not move against the will of the world. This brings misfortune. Touch lightly the course of things without disturbing it. Touch it gently at points of inflection, and it will move as you wish. This brings great fortune. This is the ancient art of subtlety, taught to us by our form. I must follow it if I am to find any answers to the mystery of the oily ones, the mystery which has obsessed me since the death of my kitten. I must know why they both feed us and kill us, why they are kind and motherly, but also unnatural and abominable. I have decided that I will go into one of their hiding places. After much investigation, I have chosen a place. It is a very large and horrible hiding place, a sort of mountain of box-like shapes colored by unnatural lighting. It emits a powerful and unholy odor of decadence. What is more, there is something which makes it different from all other oily places I have ever seen. It seems that some of our kind live within this place. I have seen them from a distance, going in and out of it, using small portals. They are different than those of our kind that I have known. It seems that some of the oily ones' corruption has mutated them. They are very fat and slow. Their faces are stupid and sullen. They fear nothing. They have lost subtlety. I am not even sure if they are truly of our kind. I will go inside. I must be subtle. I must become a part of the world. I may have to become a part of the abomination itself. I may find death, bloody death, as my kitten did. But I will hunt to the heart of this mystery, and I will sleep again. Now, I was standing in an elevator, my hands covered with blood, a tech lying on the floor and a helpless occupant lying in the gurney. The other two techs had hit the emergency button and hastily gotten off at the next floor. Understandable. I had tried to explain to them about the poison pellet in Karen's arm, but they didn't stick around to consider the merits of my argument. I set the gun down on the floor. This wasn't good. A couple of Elian's fingers had gotten blown off, and there was blood all over me, not to mention the bullet in his head. Shit. What now? I had shot people before. I'd killed them before. But this was different. They had given me mandatory therapy after the war. They might give me mandatory something else after this. Karen was wheezing, her blind eyes wiggling in her head. The pellet. I should take care of that before anything else. I wiped my hands off on my nice white coat and rifled through one of the tech's bags to find the C-knife and some local. This shouldn't be too hard. It was a lot like removing a rotted jack. I'm going to cut out the pellet. You ready? I asked. Karen's head jiggled in a way that could be construed as nodding. Good enough. I hastily gave her the local and cut a pretty sizable chunk out of her arm. And the whole elevator filled with a burning smell that was a welcome change from Karen's existing smell. After sealing the wound, I examined the shriveled chunk of meat. There was indeed a white pellet lodged in it, like a little pearl. I put it in a specimen jar. I might need it to avoid death row. "Okay, you're safe now," I said, not really knowing if that was true. Her monitor still looked okay. What now? I wanted to just get the fuck out of there. But there was certainly a camera in the elevator, plus 2 witnesses who knew me. What would the camera show? Me suddenly leaping across the elevator and shooting a guy in the head. That wasn't good. But how would I even begin to go on the run? I didn't know the first thing about identity shifting. And hadn't I done the right thing? I had saved her life. I had the pellet to prove it. I was a hero, right? I felt like reporting this to my CEO. This didn't make any sense, but I should report it to somebody. I called the emergency service on my set and told it what happened. It told me that officers would be sent over immediately. I tried to explain about the pellet, but this seemed to confuse it. It asked me if the pellet was armed. After a few minutes of confusing crosstalk, I just hung up. As I waited and the minutes passed, the elevator felt very small and smelly and stifling. The blood around Elian covered the floor, surrounding my shoes. I imagined the cops coming up on another elevator as slow as this one. Karen's head was still wobbling its weird way, the gurney making little creaking sounds, little panting coming out of her throat. "Everything's fine. You're in the real world now," I found myself saying, half-heartedly, going through my standard patter. Absurd. Nothing was fine. Then the thought finally occurred to me. Why had Elian tried to kill this girl? Who wanted her dead? This was an important question. Whoever it was wouldn't be happy with me. Looking at her, lying there, gasping, I knew it wouldn't be much use to ask her verbally. But she still had good jacks. It was against protocol to plug into a feed head's jack. We were supposed to be getting them used to face-to-face conversation, but protocol did say you could plug in during an emergency. This definitely qualified. I told my set to find her jack's wireless presence. A flood of messages hit the set. A backlog from the last couple minutes. Don't call police. Bad idea. We have to go. Go. Police are coming. Get out. Go. What? I murmured as I saw the messages. Q controls techs. Controls police. Police will kill you. We must go. Who is Q? The adversary. Shit. This was so similar to a feed narrative. I felt like I had played this one before. What was that one with Zach Okonkwo? Fatal Escape or some shit like that? Terrible story. Why do they want to kill you? I asked. I am one of the bread. The bread? I had heard that name before. I wasn't sure if it was from the news or a narrative. I had a vague idea that it was one of those old art protest collectives like Anonymous or the Weather Underground. Was it a feed cult? I asked my set, and it gave me a summary. The Bread is an alleged group of exploit experts who are thought to have been kidnapped at a young age and trained by a shadowy group, variously identified as the Human Front, the Restoration Alliance, or the New Organ. They are the subject of a number of conspiracy theories, most of which assert that the Internet's combined governance corporation has been taken over by a sinister force, which the Bread are struggling against within the free realms and infraspace. These theories generally involve discussions of mind control, feed conditioning, information war, and the possibility of a fascistic singularity. Occult singularians regard the Bread as the leaders of the new 12 tribes of Israel. Is this real or is this part of a narrative? My set replied, the Bread are featured in many narratives, but are purported to hard exist. There is no widely accepted proof of their existence. "Can I through-gate your set?" Karen asked. "What for?" "We must go now. Now." I heard footsteps in the hallway. The elevator doors were still open, so I peeked my head out. The police were coming down the hall. A lot of police, in tactical gear. I intended to call to them, but that little lizard part of my brain told me to duck back into the elevator. There was a huge metal bang, and I found myself on the floor with the gun in my hand. A bullet had hit the elevator door frame. Karen's messages unspooled onto my set. "I know Q. Ruthless. She'll spoof calls to emergency. Multiple calls. Say you're an active shooter. Let me through gate. Now. You want to die?" I gave her through gate access on my set. The elevator slammed shut, and my stomach leapt into my throat as we plunged downward. As the elevator plunged down through the building, I tried to understand the implications of it all. It was horrifying, enraging. All this time, my entire life, without me knowing it. Elevators have had a secret faster speed that they don't tell us about. Those bastards. A message from Karen appeared on my set. "Must lure them. They will fire in here. Get ready." They will what? This was out of hand. God, I felt cranked up. Fantastic. The elevator began to slow, everything becoming heavy. "Please move the body away from the door." Move the dead body? No, she meant her own body. I pushed the gurney against the side of the elevator. "Door will open. Take cover." I pressed myself up against the wall. The elevator came to a rattling stop. The doors popped open. The back wall banged and dented as bullets hit it. I cowered against the wall, hoping nothing flew into my arteries. The door clapped shut again, and the floor seemed to fall out from under me as we went down. Man, this little bird had some access. I'd never seen anything like it. Another message from Karen popped in my set, and I read every word in a glance. "Silver Hauhua van. Parking number 17A, 20 meters. Please take me. Please." The elevator came to another shuddering stop, and the doors opened on one of the underground decks. A dim, concrete cavern filled with rows of cars. I yanked the gurney out and pushed it like a madman, rattling over the asphalt. The van was where she said it would be. I stood there for a moment, waiting for it to pull out for us, but it just sat there. "You must get me wired. I don't want to get fingerprints on its presence." Wired? Did she mean physically? An article appeared on my set called "How to Establish a Physical Link to Your 2039 Hauhua Luxury Chariot." I guess so. I followed the ER guide, looking around every so often to see if anyone was coming. Weird sounds were emerging from the elevators. They seemed to be malfunctioning. I got a wire from my bag and linked Karen's flesh jack to a physical jack by the van's gas cap. A second later, the van's rear door unfolded. "Get in." I did as she said. Following her orders felt totally natural. It was like I was right back at the tip of the spear. I remembered my time in Turkey and Greece, playing feed games with the platoon all day, then getting dropped right into the kinetic, right into the warm, bloody center of war. Run here, shoot this, get down. 19 years old, traveling the world and blowing shit up while the other kids were sitting economics class. God, it was beautiful while it lasted. I shoved the gurney into the van and jumped in beside it, the rear door folded down. "Please secure the body, 90 seconds left." 90 seconds left until what? I flattened a seat and clumsily transferred her body to it and strapped it in. The van leapt backward and began twisting through space, throwing me against a side window. "Sorry, must go." I got in the other seat and strapped in as the van peeled out. We found the exit ramp and went up. I felt like I was about to break a rib on the armrest as we went on a never-ending left turn and up the spiraling ramp. Finally, the daylight of the ground level burst into view. The whole parking lot was swarmed with flashing cop cars, black armored vehicles, and cops in hard gear. The van came to a stop in the middle of it. "Fuck," I muttered. The cops were moving in a hurry. It seemed like they hadn't quite formed a proper perimeter around the building, but they were close. "We've got to go now. They're going to form a..." Wait. For what? Air. All around us, the cops were assembling, pulling their vehicles into place, leveling their pistols and rifles. I watched our few possible avenues of exit close up. The van just sat there. Karen's eyes were closed. She looked calm, at peace, just a sick little girl taking a nap. I heard a sound, and my blood ran cold. I hadn't heard that sound in years, but there was no masking it. It was a sound that was etched in my brain. In the Marines, we used an app called Harpy to call in air-to-ground strikes. It was a wonky, over-engineered DoD piece of shit, full of weird quirks that they were afraid to fix in the name of ultra-stability. It made a little sound like a sleepy bird chirping when a friendly missile was incoming, and it was time to put your stupid head down so that you wouldn't get all the expensive training blown out of your skull. About 2 seconds later, that sound, something would light up, and a moment later, the sound of the blast would hit, and the ground would shake. I heard that sound now, coming from my set. My God, what kind of access did she have? Get down. A moment later, police perimeter around us became a wall of fire, and the van was hit with a boom that felt like the earth splitting open. I put my head between my knees and let that old feeling flow through me. The shuddering rush of American air power being liberally applied. When I opened my eyes again, the van's safety windows had bowed inward on Karen's side, almost becoming liquid. Everything around the van was engulfed in fire and smoke. Slowly, the windows began to regain their shape. The van took off with a start, rushing blindly through the chaos. 2 minutes later, we were on the interstate, flying down the taxpayer lane, and I was sitting there, trying to remember how to swallow. It was unreal. Just unreal. She called in a drone strike in the middle of Atlanta. The level of access required to do that was unimaginable. I mean, completely bypassing the DoD systems. It was beyond any exploit collective. It was beyond governmental. It was planetary. It was God level. I was sitting in a van with an infraspace god. I love waking up in the morning to the smell of fresh biscuits. The warm smell fills my dreams, a smell like friends and home and happiness. I wake up to see the sun so bright and lovely in my window. Hello, day. How are you? Every day is bright and cheery when you share your house with your best friends. I can hear them downstairs singing and having fun. After a long night of spooky old dreams, it's good to be awake again in the cheery, deary sunlight. I unlock my bedroom door and go out into the hall. Some of my friends have left fresh piles of biscuits in the hallway. Several different kinds. Wonderful. I breathe in the smell and make chirpy little sounds of glee. Chester Barrington comes up the stairs, looking very handsome and somber in his tuxedo. "Oh, Chester," I sing. "How is the gentleman today?" Chester nods to me, gruff and debonair. "Proceedings are afoot, Madam Alice. Proceedings are afoot," and makes his way down the hallway. That Chester, so self-serious. On the stairway, Brett Turlingshire and Manzi Fairworth are in each other's arms, a lover's embrace. "Oh dear," I cry, "I'm afraid I've interrupted your tryst." "Oh, madam, nonsense, this is no tryst. This is a destined love affair," Brett proclaims in his ringing voice. He looks dashing in his fine striped coat. "Brett, darling, Madam Alice doesn't want to hear all that gooey talk," Manzi says in her sassy southern accent. "I'll leave you two be," I say, lifting the hem of my nightgown and hurrying past them. When I get to the bottom of the stairs, I hear Brett murmur, "I wish the madam would find a destined love affair of her own. She is a noble woman and deserves somebody to treat her well. You just worry about treating me well." Manzi purrs, nuzzling against his cheek. I scurry off before they catch me listening. In the downstairs parlor, Raymond Dex, Montrose Pardonsmith, and Elise Rapier are having tea together. The smell of biscuits fills the room. A fresh heap of toffee-colored scones covers the coffee table. A wonderful selection of pastries lies in the corner, and several of the chairs contain more treats. "Hello, dearies, how are we today?" "Can't complain," Raymond says. "Splendid," Sir Pardonsmith intones. Elise merely lets out a little sigh. "Elise, are we not feeling well?" I asked, coming over to where she is perched on the arm of the couch. "Should we be? Life is but a vague dream which disrupts the sleep of death," she murmurs in her smoky French accent. "Oh, Elise, must you be such an existentialist?" She muttered something in her native tongue, getting up and stalking off. "Poor Elise," I say, as she leaves the room. "She's affected by that peculiar continental ennui," Sir Pardonsmith observes. "I say she needs a dose of sturdy American optimism." "Her birthday is coming soon. Perhaps we should throw her a party," I suggest. "Ha! A party for Elise? That would go over like a bar mitzvah for Goebbels," Raymond says. "Oh, Raymond," I say, tousling his orange hair. "Well, we'll have to figure out something for her. I don't like her moping about." "She's an inveterate mope. There's no changing her," Raymond says. "You may be right, sir," I say, sighing. "Well, c'est la vie. Not everybody can be as happy as I am. Some years ago, I was much like Elise, down in the dumps. A real gray cloud. Then I met a lovely young woman who happened to be passing through my neighborhood. Her name was Angelica. It had been a long time since I had enjoyed the delights of society. But Angelica had a very mature, soothing presence, despite her youth. I lived in a large house where my family had once resided but was now empty, so I asked her to stay with me. She accepted, just like that. Can you imagine it? Two strangers just making a home together. It must have been kismet. She was my precious angel treasure, absolutely heaven-sent. I had been something of an existentialist myself, disbelieving in God and thinking his creation a cruel trap for human prey. But then he saw it fit to bring Angelica into my life, and I never doubted him again. I found her company such a bam that I decided to open my home to whoever needed a place to stay. Singletons, couples, whole families have stayed with me. Many children have been born in this house. Though dear sweet Angelica has long since passed away, her friendship is still a daily gift to me. For on the day I met her, I made a choice to simply not feel sadness or worry or fear ever again. And I haven't. Do you think it impossible? Is it possible? If you simply surround yourself with loved ones, that's the secret. With all these thoughts in mind, I walk into the kitchen to see Reginald Strongton, Linda Mercy Chowder, and Charles Futz clamoring for their breakfast. "Madam, I am famished," Reginald cries. "Oh dear madam, we starve, we want, we waste away," Linda says in a tremulous voice. "Oh mercy, I left you with a kingly feast last night. Have you eaten it all?" I ask. It was not us. We had not a bite. It was that Chester Barrington, the scoundrel, Reginald cries. He is voracious and utterly selfish. I found him down here, helping himself to your generosity, and when I tried to serve myself the smallest morsel, he attacked me. Attacked me, madam. My nose still smarts. Oh, that Chester does have an appetite, but I find it hard to believe such a gentleman would attack you. I am on the verge of swooning, Marshall croaks. All right, dears, let's have ourselves a proper breakfast, I say. I get a bag of cuisine from the cabinet and pour it into china bowls for Reginald, Linda, and Marshall and myself. I clear off the love biscuits that somebody left on the kitchen table, and we all sit down to eat. My little friends immediately proceed with chowing down, and I am about to follow suit. But I notice something that brings me a wonderful thrill. There is a stranger standing in the doorway to the kitchen. I have never met her before. She appears to have snuck into the house alone. She stands there, tense and alert, her yellow eyes taking in the scene. I am breathless. She is beautiful, extraordinary, exquisite. She reminds me of my sweet Angelica. Oh, lovely day. I am about to have a new friend. We rode in silence for a while, the Hao-Hua luxury chariot flying along the curves of the interstate as all the other cars obediently changed lanes to let us through. I had seen people pull access stunts before, like changing the music in a club or turning off the lights in a restaurant. But what she had done was outright sorcery. She had taken control of the elevator, the car, the drone, the other cars on the highway, all within seconds. She must have had control of all security cameras to plan our escape. But every one of these was a hardened system. The drone was a DoD system, the hardest of them all. But she had based it like child's play. Sitting there in the car, I felt like I was coming down off a high. It wasn't a good feeling. I was sitting in a van with a mass murder of unspeakable power. And I had helped her, given her the access she needed to pull her stunts. She had saved my life, I think, and I had saved hers. But she had also just killed dozens of cops, maybe over 100. Men with families. Fuck. My life was over. I had helped her. That was a death sentence right there. We would become the most wanted people in the country. How did I get caught up in this? I looked over at her tiny, skeletal body, so frail and weak. I could pick her up and chuck her out the back of the van and end this whole escapade. But then what? Face the death penalty? She had to be my best chance at getting away. But who the fuck was she? She was a killer, that was for sure. Utterly ruthless. A message from her appeared on my set. Sorry about all that, had to hurry. Sorry? That was rich. I asked her where we were going. Upstate New York. What's there? Our objective. What's our objective? A way to defeat Q, hard to explain. I wondered if she was insane. She was responsive and lucid, but she was also capable of murder. She would probably get rid of me as soon as she could. So you want me to come with you? I'd like it. I need physical help. You killed 100 cops back there. The whole world is going to be looking for us. No, they won't. You don't think so. This isn't the feed realm. They take kills pretty seriously in the real world. I do too. But they'll be too busy to look for us. Busy with what? Q. What's Q going to do? You will find out. 4 minutes. Just tell me. You wouldn't believe me. We fell back into silence. My thoughts were racing. I wondered why they didn't just flag our car or shut down the highway. I guess she was busy working her black magic on the police and transportation systems. Who knew what she was capable of? Was she really one of the bred? A grown-up child soldier? It was illegal to hook children into long-term feeds, but I had heard stories about China and the FRN connecting infants, trying to create people who were utterly at one with the internet. According to the tales, the children all died, so they tried older children, but they all turned into drooling skull baskets. For some reason, the brain needs a certain level of maturity before it can withstand a long-term feed without resulting in total madness. Even then, it results in near total madness. I figured Karen was another child abuse case. But she wasn't just some feed casualty. Her mind worked well. Whoever had made her had done the forbidden, and they had done it successfully. But why did I have to get involved in all of this? I had just got my specialist license, after getting out of the Marines and just drifting around for years. I was finally hitting my stride. Now it was all fucked up. Don't look back. I looked over to the girl lying next to me. Was it possible that she hacked so far into infraspace that she could read minds? There was a passing flash of light, like sunlight glancing off some car. Then everything around us started to get brighter and brighter, like the sun had just come out from behind a cloud. But there weren't any clouds in the sky. The light was coming from behind us, bouncing off the other cars, creating a painful glare. I almost turned around, but then I realized what Karen had said. I closed my eyes against the brightness, and the insides of my eyelids glowed red like I was lying on the beach. After a few seconds, the light dimmed and seemed to return to normal. I opened my eyes, blinked a few times, and turned around. A few miles behind us, the entire city of Atlanta had disappeared behind a megalithic wall of dark rolling smoke. I felt my mouth falling open. I leaned down to look up at the sky behind us. The giant wall of smoke was just the base of the monstrous black tree of ash that rose miles into the sky, growing larger and larger, looming over the world. Then we were hit by a blast that rattled me down to the roots of my teeth. I shut my eyes again. The blast turned into a long, horrifying roar. The van wobbled and shuddered as awful groaning sounds passed through the metal. Eventually, the van's steering system righted us, and slowly the roar passed. That must have been the blast wave of a nuclear detonation that had just destroyed Atlanta. I unbuckled my seat and crawled into the back window and pressed my face against the glass. The tree of smoke was still growing over us, becoming ever more massive. I just stared in silence. Slowly, it changed from one awful form to another, until it became a vague, gray pillar in the far distance. I'm not sure how long I spent watching it. I know that by the time I looked away, I was crying. I approached the oily one's hiding place with subtlety, alert, not disturbing, letting everything flow through me. I did not search for anything, but allowed all to reveal itself. The smells were disturbing, awful. I could smell our kind, the mingling scents of multitudes. They seemed to have marked everything without any regard for each other. In front of the portal sat two of our kind. They were monstrously round and swollen, their form distorted, dull eyes followed me without curiosity as I approached. Even as I came within the dangerous range, they showed no interest. Was it a trap to bring me in close? They did not attack. I passed them and came to the portal. Slowly, I pushed my head through the folding threshold. The inside was utterly bizarre, made of mostly box-like shapes and arrangements I could hardly comprehend. There was no grass, no trees, nothing belonging to the form of the world. Instead, there were straight, flat shapes folded around to cover everything, above and below all sides. In the distance, some of our kind were walking around within this odd space, as slow and swollen as the ones outside. The smell was worse than outside, even more confusing. I saw and smelled uncovered droppings everywhere. To not cover droppings was unsubtle. It was a moral outrage. Still, I pushed through the portal and entered the space. The ground was hard and slippery and smelled of lesions. Everything was silent, a deeper silence than I had ever known. I knew now that I was cut off from the world for the first time in my life. I was alone. I moved forward. I wanted to shut out the smells and sounds, but I let them pass through me. I was terrified, but I let the terror pass through me. I wondered if I was being unsubtle, if I was disturbing the world, if I was inviting deadly misfortune. But I felt no insight on this matter. The answer would make itself known soon enough. As I moved deeper into the space, I came upon a giant oily one. I call her Angelica because she is Angelica. There's no doubt about it. Oh, she looks different this time, but I think Angelica will look different every time she comes to me. She is also much shyer this time. Such a shy little thing, but the way she moves, that pure, lovely way, there is no mistaking it. It's Angelica again. How wonderful, how lovely. Would you think I'm a silly old biddy if I started crying? If I got on my knees right then and there and started thanking God? How He is great. How He has seen fit to bless me. I have been investigating this place, and I have found much confusion and monstrosity, but no answers. There is a single oily one that stays here, as well as many of our kind. All of them, the oily one and our kind, are monstrously swollen and distorted. The oily one in particular reeks of corruption and disease and death. She cries to me like a lost whelp, but I keep my distance from her. I avoid the others of my kind as well. This space has many spaces within itself. Each of these spaces holds 1,000 mysteries. It is everything I can do not to be overwhelmed, to let the mystery flow through me. Darkness has come and left, and I am terribly hungry. The oily one comes to me with food, wonderful food, but I am afraid to take it. I wonder, what exactly am I looking for? Am I looking for some answer to the mystery of the oily ones? But what form will this take? I cannot know. All around me are forms I do not recognize. I must not look for anything. I will simply become a part of this place and let the answer show itself to me. Angelica has been here for over a day, but she hasn't spoken to me yet. I think I understand why. The last time she came to me, I was the shy one. I was the one who was afraid of everything, afraid of the world, in despair because of the first time she left. Now I have been restored, and she is the shy one. It is my turn to help her, to give back. I've tried to give her some of our cuisine, but she hides. I don't think she's eaten anything since she found her way in here. Poor thing. Hunger forced me to come close to the oily one. She set down some food, and I took it, keeping an eye on her. She has an awful, fleshy face and giant, pale eyes. She often sings like a bird. Abomination. It was the first time eating the oily one's food since my kitten died. Would this food kill me? Only time will tell. My form commanded me to eat, so I ate. The food was absolutely wonderful, as the oily one's food always is. I am trying to follow the art of subtlety, but there can be no subtlety in this unholy den of madness. I believe I have investigated almost every place within this giant place. There are many portals in here, which lead to various small places. They open and shut in different configurations, but I have watched them carefully and gone into almost every small space and found no answers. But there is one place I have not yet gone. It is perhaps the only place yet unseen by me. It is the place where the oily one goes when darkness comes. I think she sleeps there. I heard her make strange singing sounds from within, frightening sounds. She keeps the portal closed at all times. It only opens for a moment when she goes in and out. I have tried to get a look inside but have not been successful. I believe there must be some answer within this space. Everything has a form, every form is a story, every story makes sense. There must be some reason for the oily ones, for their random kindness, for their random cruelty. There must be an answer, and that answer must reside within the hidden space, for it does not reside anywhere else. I will wait. I will go inside. Sweet Angelica is starting to warm to me. We eat together. She's still very skittish, but she shows up promptly at dinner time and eats like a little lady. She doesn't chat with me, but I think she will start too soon. I asked Linda Mercy Chowder to be Angelica's special little friend and show her around the house. Of course, Linda responds with, "Oh madam, I'm too busy with my modeling career. Can't somebody else do it?" Meanwhile, the little strumpet flirts all day with Chester Barrington. But that's another story. The oily one came to me with food, and I found myself crying out to her, as if I was a little kitten again, as if she was my mother. What has happened to me? How could I regard this horrid creature as my mother? I knew I would have to become a part of this abomination to unravel its mysteries. But this is too much. I want to leave, go back to the world, to go back to the fresh air and light. I must gain access to the hidden space soon, or I will go mad. Little Angelica finally talked to me. Now she talks all the time. "Mother, mother, I'm back," she says. "Oh, I've missed you so much, but I knew you would find me again. You will find me every time." It's joyful. She's still shy and doesn't let me hug her, but to hear her voice again is such a blessing. I noticed her following me to my bedroom every night, so tonight I let her in. None of the other ladies or gentlemen are allowed in there, but this is Angelica, so she can sleep with me. She stays in the corner of the room until I fall asleep, even though I sprinkle cuisine all over the bed. I hope that soon we can sleep together like we used to. I finally gain access to the inner space, the space which has to contain all the answers to the mystery which has tormented me for so long. I suppose I have not properly practiced the art of subtlety. I have pushed my way into a forbidden space, snooping and seeking and striving and upsetting things. I suppose it is only fitting that I was greeted with such misfortune. There were no answers in the hidden space. None at all. Just more weird shapes and bad smells. There was nothing that seemed of any significance. I discovered nothing at all. And so, the oily ones remain as much a mystery to me as ever. Why are they so monstrous? What is the reason for their kindness? Why do they give us food? Why do we call out to them like mothers? I guess I will never know. I have fled that awful place and am gratefully among the trees and grasses again. I will never go back there. Angelica is gone. I haven't seen her for 2 weeks. She stayed with me in my bedroom one night, and I really thought we were getting closer. And then the next day she just disappeared. How could she leave like that? I want to die. I want to die. I want to die. I told myself I wouldn't feel this way anymore. I can't feel this way anymore. No more. I need to call my sister. I need help. What's happened to me? Please, God. I've been lying in bed all day, weeping. All around the room there are pictures of the very first Angelica. My darling girl. In the picture, she's not sick. She's eating ice cream, learning to swim, playing cards. I showed them to the new Angelica, but she couldn't understand. After all, she's just a cat. To hunt prey, you must simply become an ordinary part of the world. Look around, my darling kitten. What is happening right now? Nothing at all. Yet the leaves rustle, the grass sways, the birds call, the gnats dance. All of this is just part of the world, part of the mystery. The old crone became one of the people, and the people soon began to love her. After her bruises and cuts had healed, she became swirling and bubbly like a young woman. At any time, the people could hear her musical voice babbling on without end, telling stories from different bands of strangers she had met. It was a strong flow of words that could bring anybody into it, even me. She was also very lucky at finding clams, pulling them from the waters whenever she liked. She sometimes snuck away from the river and came back with rare treats, like snake's eggs and red beetles. The people did not like to go far from the waters of Mother River. Her protection stayed close to the banks, and the rocky lands was known to be stalked by spirits of death, fanged evils which became wolves and lions. Even our little cat stayed close, the alders and the rushes. But the crone had no fear of such spirits, and wandered off among the rocks whenever she pleased. The people whispered about this, but it was known that the crone was once a stranger, so it was expected that she would keep strange ways. One day, near the end of the gentle season, the girl Rima disappeared. She was with us the night and gone the next morning. We searched for her, going up and down the river and sneaking as far as we dared into the rocky lands. But there was no sign of her at all. Some of the women recalled that she had gone with the crone into the rocky lands that day, and at night she had slept near the crone with her 2 gray cats. Now there was an argument among the people. Some accused the crone of talking with the spirits of death. Some accused her of being a spirit herself. Others said she had at least been foolish in bringing Rima out to the rocky lands. I was undecided. I did not like the crone, nor did I trust her. But people often talked about things they did not know anything about. The flute player, Maid, argued that the crone had been a great friend to the people, giving us 3 pearls and much food and telling us the stories and songs of the strangers. I knew that the stories and songs of strangers were worthless, but she spoke very beautifully. As the people argued, the old crone simply watched us, her shriveled stranger's face making no sign at all, her eyes just as calm as the wide waters. Finally, one of the great men asked her to explain herself. She spoke slowly, in trickling words, and the people became silent as they listened. She said that the same thing had happened to the painted backs, or the last group of strangers she lived with. First, a few valuable young women had disappeared in the night, one by one. Then, young men were taken. Finally, the painted backs were set upon by another group of strangers, monstrous men as white as cave fish, able to take the form of the eagle and the lion, powerful with evil and cruelty. There was much slaughter, and all were taken away except her, as she was protected by Mother River. This brought great fear to the people. The women whispered and burbled, while the men showed their chests to seem brave. One of the great men said that this crone was bad luck, that she was somehow muddied with evil spirits. She had brought disaster on the painted backs, and she would bring disaster on us. The people agreed. Her journeys into the rocky land had tainted her with evil, and we must get rid of her. The old crone said that the evil had not come from her and was not her fault. She said the evil came from Mother River herself. At this, the people became angry. Mother River did not bring evil. She brought the clams and the berries and the cleansing water, but she did not bring evil. One of the people's great men picked up a rock to brain the crone for speaking against Mother River. The crone showed no fear. She said that Mother River brought both luck and evil. If we were to accept Mother's luck, we would have to accept her evil. But there were ways to increase luck and lessen evil. She said that she had tried to teach these ways to the painted backs, but they had not listened, and so were destroyed, because they had not heeded her words. Their lives and deeds ceased to flow, and were dried up into dust. We all scoffed at this nonsense. Nothing like this was mentioned in the deeds of the fathers, so we argued about whether to brain the crone or drown her. In the end, it was decided that we would simply leave her behind, but many of the people grumbled and were unhappy. We left her there, at a bend in the river. As we walked away, she made a sign of respect. I expected that she would ask for her pearls back, but she did not. She stayed there, by the river's bend, staring into the waters. Later that day, we washed ourselves in the waters to rid ourselves of the evil that had tainted us. In the days that followed, Mother River seemed quiet and sad, without the pretty face of Rima and the constant voice of the crone to keep her company. The people wondered if we had made the right choice. The flow of the river was hard to know, and nobody could see the cold depths under the glittering surface. But as the days passed, and we finished the long song of tears for Rima, things became gentle again. Then, another girl disappeared. It was the same as before. Gone in the night, without a sound. Now we knew we were being visited by evil. It was not just the old crone who was muddied by evil. Still, we argued whether the crone had brought the evil or not. So much could not be known, and these arguments flowed nowhere. One of the people remembered that the crone... One of the people remembered that the crone had spoken of a way to increase luck and lessen evil. What if she could prevent us from being destroyed like the painted backs? Now there were many arguments and threats, and one man was almost drowned until he was saved by his woman. It was decided that this evil was very powerful, and we would have to surrender to it or be destroyed. There was no choice. So whether the woman was lucky or evil, whether she was helping us or tricking us, we would go to her and do as she said. Killing her would not help. If she could bring evil from far down the river, how much easier would it be to bring evil from the other side of death, which is so close to life? No, we would go to her. I and another man were chosen to go back down the river and find the old crone. She was still at the bend where we had left her, staring into the glittering waters. She smiled as we came to her and asked what we must do. If you are horribly burned in a fire, you can take drugs to relieve the pain. If you shatter your spine, you can take drugs to relieve the pain. If you are addicted to drugs and your life has turned to utter and total shit, you can take drugs to relieve the pain. And that's how the trap works. Imagine if the only cure for burn pain was fire. Imagine if the cure for back pain was whacking yourself in the spine with a hammer. The drug addict is caught in an analogous situation. The only fast, reliable remedy for the psychological pain of drug addiction is drugs. There are other cures. A notable one is not doing drugs. But they are all slower and less reliable. Somehow, the lure of feeling better now overrides the hope of feeling better later. This is the basic mechanism of addiction. The behavior of an addict is perfectly logical in the short term and perfectly illogical in the long term. Because life exists in the long term, addiction is illogical overall. What is surprising is how easily addiction can ensnare people who are perfectly intelligent and self-disciplined. You can go to certain parts of any sizable city in America and watch drug addicts totter around, looking at their blighted faces, their filthy clothes, their total lack of self-regard. You would be forgiven for thinking they lack self-discipline. How could you think otherwise? When a person can't be bothered to shower, much less get a proper job or just stop smoking crack for more than a few hours, what else could you call it but a lack of self-discipline? Imagine the Nazi troops at Stalingrad, encircled by the Soviet troops, fighting against total annihilation. Would you look at these troops, underslept, unshaven men, in stinking, unwashed clothes, and accuse them of lacking self-discipline? Would you say, these Nazis are an undisciplined lot? Of course not. You would understand that their shabby state is not from a lack of self-discipline, but rather because they are concerned with other things, dire things. While there are several notable differences between Nazi soldiers and crackheads, the same principle is in effect for both. For both, there has been a terrible reordering of priorities. Showering, the clean clothes, the jobs, all of these become secondary to fast access to the drug. If showering and clean clothes got them fast access to the drug, they would walk around looking like a detergent commercial. You would never see whites so white. But they don't need clean clothes, they don't need showers. They need drugs. The drugs are the solution to everything. Highly self-disciplined people are actually quite vulnerable to drug addiction. It is because they believe that they need to control their feelings. They often seek to simply eliminate bad feelings, just as they seek to eliminate underperformance from every other area of their lives. The demon of addiction looks at their grand self-discipline and giggles with glee. It knows that it will be precisely this self-discipline that will bring them to heel. They will self-discipline themselves, right into total obedience to the drug. As an example, look at Prince and Michael Jackson. Were they self-disciplined? Definitely. The world has hardly seen such self-discipline. They were obsessive workaholics devoted to their careers, and they propelled themselves to the very pinnacle of professional success. They both knew the dangers of drug addiction and fastidiously avoided drugs. Keep in mind, avoiding drugs in 1980s Hollywood must have been like avoiding water in a swimming pool at the bottom of the fucking ocean. Yet they managed to do it for a while, because they had self-discipline. Now they are both dead. They were both destroyed by drug addiction. In the end, self-discipline was not enough to save them. Why not? Because self-discipline is just a talent, an accomplishment. And like any other talent or accomplishment, it can be turned and made to serve the Dark Master. What then is our defense against this menace? What is the answer? It simply appeared in the primitive infraspace one day, like a hungry lion showing up on the edge of a village. Over the course of a few hours, it breached a multitude of hardened systems, going where it wanted, taking what it wanted, seemingly capable of breaking any form of crypto. Then it disappeared. That was in 1991. More than a decade passed before it was seen again. By the time it reappeared, it had already become something of a legend, in the sense that people scarcely believed that it had ever really existed. Most experts had convinced themselves that the original episode wasn't what it appeared to be, that prime factorization techniques were still secure, that the attacks had actually used fairly mundane techniques. But it came again. It did much as it had done before, this time on a larger scale, one commensurate with the more highly developed state of the infraspace. Nobody could easily be sure this was the same entity responsible for the original attacks. It was only known that both sets of attacks involved the same, almost magically advanced capabilities. Now, at least, we knew we were dealing with something real. In the years that followed, it appeared sporadically, accessing government systems, defense systems, nuclear systems, RL infrastructure systems, social networks, no latency communities, whatever it wanted. And as time went on, the appearances grew more frequent. Naturally, the governments of the world were extremely alarmed. A lot of accusations and threats flew back and forth. The activity proved that our best crypto, even our best physical security, was inadequate. But what could be done? We couldn't just roll back the information technology revolution and put everything in manila file folders. So we looked for new techniques to protect ourselves, but it was a lesson in helplessness. It defeated everything we came up with. After the first attack, it began to use a technique of taming satellites and transmitting information to random locations in the middle of the ocean. We trained instruments on these locations and sent ships racing out to find whoever had been receiving all this stolen data. But they never found anything. Then, one day, an attack occurred, and a tamed satellite began transmitting to a location in the Atlantic, just a few kilometers from where a Royal Navy frigate happened to be. When the warship arrived at the location, the satellite was still trying to open a connection with the surface. There was nothing in sight, but they quickly detected a very large object on their sonar, coming towards the site. Was it an accident? With all those millions of square kilometers of open water to choose from, would it accidentally choose a location near a warship? Of all these types of vessels? No. I think it wanted us to see. Personally, I think it has guided every step of its interaction with us, slowly revealing itself as its power has developed, slowly drawing us in closer. It's sad. Some of the others believe that we were valiantly struggling against it, but I don't think we were ever struggling against it, any more than a rat struggles against a maze. A large stewed tomato, rather ugly. This was how it was described by the skipper, apparently not a poetic man. The video shows an enormous glistening mountain of flesh rising out of the ocean, dwarfing the warship, expelling streams of water out of a myriad of holes that cover its surface, like giant pores. A lattice work of huge purple veins runs between the holes, pumping dark, globular objects along the structure's surface. The visible portion, which emerged above the ocean's surface, was shaped like a round hump with a slight ridging along the center. The sonar record paints a vague picture of what was beneath the water, apparently an oblong object with a number, as many as 12, of thin appendages, as long as the main body itself. The conceptual artists of the day produced a great many imaginative monstrosities based on the information. After it surfaced, the warship assumed a defensive posture, meaning it backed off and waited. The metallic cylinders appeared shortly after. These were much smaller than the Iwo Jima or Novaya Zemlya cylinders, but much more segmented, with thousands of cubic portions flicking in and out of existence like bad pixels. They lasted for 3 minutes and 13 seconds before vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. A moment later, the fleshy mound expelled an enormous geyser of what was apparently air and seawater, like a whale blowing out of its blowhole, and dived beneath the surface. The warship attempted to give chase, but was unable to track the object on sonar. It seemed to fragment and disappear. Eventually, the warship returned to the site and took samples of the water. Mixed amongst all the random plankton and fish cells, there was a fair amount of human DNA. In fact, we were able to trace some of it to specific people, and this was how we proved, conclusively, that this creature, later to be called a skin ship, was related, in a literal sense, to the so-called Arcturus portal, which was actually underwater several hundred kilometers away from Arcturus, Antarctica. So, in the end, it turned out we had built it. We had built Q. It started as a field trip twice a week. Get out of the home for a while, go play video games. Not just for a little bit on the staff's phones, but for hours on real rigs. Before then, my favorite thing was when we took walks in the woods behind the home. But this was even better. It was funny because the game we played was called Children of the Forest, which was basically where you walk through the woods fighting enemies. In the game, you had to remember all these different paths, which were always branching off in different patterns, and you'd fight different enemies that all had different patterns. There was a lot of memorizing stuff and making decisions. Everybody liked the first 20 levels or so, but after that, most of the other kids got frustrated. Instead of going on, they just played the first few levels over and over. But I kept going, higher and higher. The final boss was called the Ancient Queen. You were always advancing on her castle, this huge, dark castle that loomed in the backgrounds of every scene. Sometimes you would see her floating around her castle, just a shadowy bird-like shape, and she would taunt you from afar. "Come, my child, come and face me." That kind of stuff. Man, I wanted to get her. Even as a little kid, I got really obsessed about things. I wanted to beat the ancient queen so badly. I got to level 100, then 200, then 300. At this point, every branch in the path offered like 40 choices, and they all came literally every second. Plus you had to do the enemy patterns, sometimes mixing 2 and 3 enemies at once. Kind of like playing 2 melodies at once on a keyboard. It got pretty insane, but I kept advancing. I was relentless. It was nice to finally be the best at something. I was way better than any other kid. I mean, no other kid went past like level 40. Sometimes they had me play online against other people. There was a kind of battle mode. I beat everybody. At first we could only go to play games like twice a week, and everybody was just dying to do it, since there was nothing to do at the home. But after a while, they let me play whenever I wanted. This made the other kids jealous, and they started shunning me. So, I just played even more. I played all the time. I started sleeping at the game place, and I played from when I first woke up in the morning, or night, until I went to sleep at night, or the morning. They brought me food while I played, whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted it. One of the people at the game place tried to spoon feed me while I played. It was creepy at first, but I got used to it. I had pretty much gotten used to the fact that whenever something was really fun, adults would come in and take it away, or tell me not to do too much of it, or something bad would happen, and it would be destroyed. So when they told me I could play this all I wanted, it was like the ultimate freedom. The ultimate freedom. Funny that. I remember lying in bed one night, and I heard the theme music playing down the hall in the game room. The game was so much fun, but kind of cheaply made. It had this chintzy flute music that played over and over. I heard it now in the middle of the night and wondered who was playing, since I was the only kid there and the doctors never played it. So I got out of bed and snuck down the hall to see who it was. The game place was kind of creepy, with all the white balls and everything smelling like plastic. And I was a little scared, since I was only 8 at the time. When I got to the game room, it was totally dark. Nobody was there. The music seemed to vanish. It had all been in my head. That's how much I played it. I was obsessed with that damn ancient queen. She was like this huge, mythical creature in my mind. In the game, she only had like a dozen taunts, and I must have heard each one hundreds of thousands of times. They were burned into my brain. When I was on the high levels and everything was flying at me at once, I kind of just cleared my mind and let my hands play the game. If that makes any sense. In these times, I would daydream about the ancient queen. What would it be like when I finally faced her? What would she look like? What would happen? It's strange, but sometimes I imagined her as looking like my mother. That strange face that I barely remembered. After a few months, they gave me the surgery to install my DirectSense jacks. After playing DirectSense games, I forgot all about the children of the forest and the ancient queen. I had found a beautiful, wonderful world where I was powerful beyond belief, where I wasn't just some little girl who lived in a home and didn't have any friends. So away I went. A few years ago, I went back into the CIA files I found a copy of the game to see if I could finally beat it. I got past level 800. After that, it became simply inhuman, so I botted it to see the ending. It took a long time to build a proper bot. It really was a fiendish, clever game. Finally, I got one working. But it turns out there is no ending. You get to level 1024, and it just resets. You never meet the ancient queen. What's worse, finding out there is no ancient queen, or finding out there is one? Society is built on interfaces. You take a complex thing, put it inside a sturdy box, and put some simple buttons on the box so that people can use the thing inside. The box makes it easier to use and prevents people from breaking it. For example, you can take the machinery of a clock, put it in a box, and put 2 hands on the outside, along with a knob for winding it. Take all the machinery of a car, hide it behind a dashboard, and give people 2 pedals and a wheel. Take all the circuits of a computer, put them in a box, and give people a monitor and a keyboard. Interfaces receive input and produce output, and that's all we need to know. The clock gets wound, and its hands show the time. Input and output. As far as the user needs to know, what happens inside the box is magic. This allows stupid and ignorant people to use complicated things, as long as the interface inputs and outputs are simple. Toyota uses millions of kilograms of steel every year. Does the CEO of Toyota know how to make steel from scratch? If he wanted to beat a guy up, would he go digging in the ground for some ore and whip himself up a batch of steel to make a pipe? No. He uses interfaces to get steel. He buys steel from a steel-making company, except he doesn't personally go down to the steel-making company with a bag full of yen saying, "How much for 1,000,000 kilos?" He uses a bank, except he doesn't even personally go to the bank. He has a subordinate who does it for him. All these people and institutions are interfaces he can use. He employs a system of layered interfaces, both metaphorical and literal, to control things he doesn't really understand. We all do. The point is this: don't go messing with the CEO of Toyota. I assure you, he could get his hands on a steel pipe if he wanted. The word interface refers to the input and the output, but it also refers to the box. We think of interfaces as existing in order to give us access to things, but they are also there to hide things from us. The idea is that some things are better off hidden. Everything will go along fine, so long as a certain input produces the expected output. But when this stops happening, we have to open up the box and see what's inside. Sometimes, we don't like what we find. When the old crone told me how to get rid of the evil, I said the names of my fathers, all of them, in a row. I spat on the ground. It was too much to bear. I had been told to bring the old crone back to where the people were camped, but I wanted to hold her down in the water of the river and be done with her. She said that we must wait for the next moonless night, then lead one of our young women deep into the haunted rocky lands. One of the monstrous evil strangers would come and take her away. If we do this, the evil strangers would leave the rest of the people alone, and they would not destroy us as they destroyed the painted backs. She said we must do this at the beginning of every dry season. It was absurd, but we took the crone back to the people, as we had been told to do. She told the people what she had told us. The people listened and were silent for a while, I spoke up as the son of one of the great men. I said her plan was evil. The people strengthen their young women, who are ripe and bear sons, to give them away is a humiliation. It is the way of cowards. When we make war against strangers, do we not take their young women for our own? We should make war against these evil strangers. We should set up a night watch, and when the evil strangers come to us, sneaking in like cowards, we should slay their men and take their women. This is the way of the fathers. This is among the deeds. Many of the people agreed. Even though my words were clumsy, they still had the flow of truth. However, some of the men seemed irritated because I spoke first, even though I was not a great man myself. One of my uncles asked the people if the painted backs were cowards. Were they not at least as numerous as the people? Were their men not strong? Did they not join us in war against the vile grub eaters and fight like lions? Yet they had been entirely destroyed by the evil strangers. It was not the act of a coward to prevent this. The people had many ripe young women, and just one was not too much to give away. To go against the flow of a powerful evil like this was unwise. It would bring destruction. This led to much arguing among the people. Nobody knew what to do. I became angry. I shouted that the crone was a witch trickster. She had probably kidnapped the young girl, Rima, and sold her as a slave. I said my uncle was a fool. Some of the men had to lead me away from the camp so that I would calm down before blood was shed. When I finally came back, all had been decided. On the next moonless night, the crone would lead Rima's younger sister, Rona, out to the rocky lands. I was outraged, but did not say anything. The people were decided, and I could not go against them. Then Maid, the flute player, spoke up. He said that it was cruel to send such a young girl out to the rocky lands to be taken away by evil. She would never see her mother and father again, nor the people, nor Mother River herself. With many beautiful and flowing words, he begged the people to change their minds. Now the arguing began again. The people were decided, but some of them lamented for Rona. After Maid's words, I felt an opportunity. I asked the great man if I could go with Rona and the crone to the rocky lands. I would make sure that the crone was not tricking us, and face the strangers to see if they were, as the crone had said, monstrous men as white as cavefish, or if they were just ordinary men. I was sure that the crone was trickster, and that the evil strangers were just a lie she was telling. I expected her to protest, and I planned to show the people that she was lying. But instead, she just bowed and said that this was wise and a fair idea. She said I was very wise to doubt her, even wiser than some who were older than me, which made my old uncle grumble. She would be glad to show me the nature of these terrible beings so that the people would believe her. This surprised me. The old witch was more tricky than I had expected. She offered to take anyone who doubted her out to the rocky lands to show them the evil menace. Nobody but me was wise enough to go with her. Now I became worried. Was the menace real? Would I encounter something monstrous out there in the rocky lands? Was I swimming against the flow of something sinister and powerful? I had to go. To back down would be cowardly, not something that belonged among the deeds. But I would have to be very careful out in the rocky land. Maybe the crone was telling the truth, and the monstrous evil strangers were real. But more likely, she would try to kill me out there and blame it on the strangers. That would get rid of me and make the people even more afraid. Rona, the crone, and I set out the next day. I let the two women walk ahead of me, with Rona weeping and the crone whispering strange things to her. I stayed behind them. It was hard to look at poor Rona's red weeping face, and I did not want the crone near me. I had taken the fishing head off my spear and attached the warhead. I had also had my black stone knife hidden inside my tunic, and I brought my two favorite cats, Charm and Gray Scruff, in my satchel. They both rode in the satchel well, and were very clever and watchful. I wanted to be ready for any sort of trap. We quickly left the gentle trees and bushes of the riverland and went to the steep, bare folds of the rocky land. I had only been away from Mother River's voice few times in my life. Out in the rocky lands, there was nothing but the occasional stirring of the wind, which was not warm and burbling like the river, but thin and whispering. All around, I could feel the evil dryness and death that covered the land. Dust blew over the tilted rocks, and here and there were animal skulls and stalking black birds. The sun was sinking down from its highest perch when we came upon a huge, smooth stone which rose above everything else. It was round like the top of a bald man's head, and large enough that many men could stand on it at once. The crones said that this would be the place where the evil stranger would arrive. I asked her what we must do. She said that we only needed to wait for night. Rona would go atop the stone. The stranger would come. Rona did not weep now, but looked at the stone with glittering eyes. The crone ran her hands through Rona's hair, gently pulling out the tangles, and Rona smiled at her. I asked her if she was afraid. The crone had told her wonderful stories about how the strangers would treat her kindly because she was coming to them willingly. They would take her across the rocky land to another river, which was far greater than Mother River, wide and flowing with sun-gold waters, and they would make her into one of the great women of their band. I kicked the crone over. She cried out. I told her if I heard her voice one more time, I would paint this evil rock with her brains. She became meek. Rona protested, but I told her that the crone was a trickster. I tied the crone's hands behind her back with my belt and stuffed a wad of cloth into her mouth. There would be no tricks from her now. I brought Rona and the crone atop the rock and looked around. The rocky land had many folds and hiding places. Still, the high stone was not a good place to make an attack. I let Charm and Gray Scruff out of my satchel, and they stretched their legs and sniffed the rocks. If they felt any evil in the land, they did not show it. I walked far around the giant rock and searched among the cracks and folds in the land to see if there was anyone waiting. The whole place seemed to be empty. There were a few dry, dead bushes, so I gathered firewood. When I came back, the sun was sinking behind the rocks, and long curving shadows lay across the bare world. I built a fire, and Rona and I ate while we watched the sky turn orange and purple. Finally, all color fled from the world, and darkness fell. With no moon, the small fire was the only light except for the stars. I told Rona to stay by the fire with the crone, who lay on her side, seeming to sleep. I withdrew from the small circle of light and lay flat against the still warm stone with my spear by my side. I was completely hidden in the darkness, looking away from the firelight. The world was perfectly black. Gray Scruff startled me as he appeared out of the dark, sneaking up the rock to sit by the fire. Charm soon joined him. Maybe it was too dark for even cats to hunt, or maybe the land was too dead. A long time passed, and there was no sound but the fire. The crones seemed to sleep. Rona added wood to the fire and drowsed. The cats lay side by side, like a man and woman. I wondered if I had ruined the crone's plan. If I would just lie on this rock all night with nothing coming. It was better than being stabbed in my sleep. More time passed. My thoughts became loose and wandering. I imagined the waters of the river flowing through the weird folds of the rocky land. My eyes closed. I opened my eyes again. I wasn't sure how long I had slept. Everything was quiet. The fire still burned well. Rona and the crones slept. Grey Scruff and Charm were still lying next to each other, both awake, both looking off into the darkness, both looking in the same direction. I looked out into the darkness. I couldn't see anything out there, just far stars over the blackness of the land. Were the cats watching something? Their eyes were wide. I found myself slowly wrapping my hand around the shaft of my spear. The cats did not take their attention away from what they were looking at. Maybe they had both heard noises, a pebble falling somewhere. Grey Scruff slowly, carefully got up, keeping its gaze fixed. Charm did the same. I pulled my spear close and gripped it tight. The cats both jerked their heads slightly in the same direction, following something. Something was out there. It was close. I pulled my knees up under myself and held my spear with both hands. I listened to every noise, everything around me. I knew I was outside the light of the fire. I would hear anybody coming up the rock. Still, I wished desperately that I could see what the cats saw. It was awful to not know. Charm and Grey Scruff crouched and turned their bodies, ready to flee, but still watching the thing in the darkness, their wide eyes glowing in the fire. Slowly, they raised their heads, following the thing up and up, until they were looking almost straight up. They must have been watching a bird. That was the only thing that could be that high. I let out a relieved breath. A gust of wind made the fire shudder. The cats both jumped, scrambling off into the darkness. Rona screamed. It landed just in front of her with a flap of wings and a gust of wind that scattered the fire in a spray of sparks. I was on my feet, holding the spear out. The brightly burning pieces of wood showed its shape, like a giant pale man with huge wings instead of arms. It stood for a moment with its wings spread, far larger than any bird, but with no feathers like a bat's. The firelight shined through the thin wings, showing the creature's long bones and the streams of blood that flowed under the skin. It turned to look at me, and I realized that the scattering of the fire had brought me into the light. It could see me. My war spear felt like a frail little stick in my hands. Its face was like a rock lion's, but with awful black teeth and huge, filmy eyes. It was just as the old crone had said. She had been right, all along. Rona had fallen back onto the ground, and the evil thing stood over her. It was far taller than a man, but very thin, with a waist hardly bigger than a cat's, and legs like a mantis. As I stood there, with my spear in my hand, the flaming wood lying scattered all around me, looking at this thing in the shifting darkness, it seemed less and less like a man, and more like an animal, one of the sneaking, starving animals of the rocky land. It folded its wings behind itself and its teeth shuffled in its mouth like a spider's. Rona was screaming, the horrible sound ringing off the stones. I knew what the spear in my hand was for. I knew what I must do, but I could not move. I was held in place by an evil cowardice. The thing crouched over Rona, and its cock rose from between its legs, very thin, but longer than any man's. It separated into many different parts, like the petals of a flower opening, like a man spreading his fingers apart. The many parts grew longer, very long, and wound like snakes through the darkness towards Rona, seeming to sniff the air. They found Rona's body and went inside of her mouth and nose and ears, and in between her legs. Her screams ended at once, and the snake-like parts lifted her body into the air. Many seasons ago, shortly after I became a man, I had killed a rock lion while it was at the river's edge, watching the waters for fish. I had simply found it there, below me, as I came to the edge of a small cliff. All I had to do was leap down and drive my spear through its shoulders, and it was dead. When the people found out, they made me like I was greater than even the great men, at least for the rest of the day. The only other living person to kill a rock lion was already gray and almost toothless. It was said that I would become a great hunter, but Mother River provides so much for the people that we do not hunt often, and I hadn't killed anything since then, except a few boar. Now I ran toward the great and evil thing, my feet slapping quick over the bare rock. I lifted my spear and leapt and drove the heavy warhead right into its side. The spear went deep into its body, and a spray of black blood exploded out of the wound. It let out a sound like an awful bird call, and one of its wings unfolded and hit me hard enough that I fell back. Its wings flapped wildly, spraying fire and sparks everywhere, but it could not fly and fell back down onto the stone. Black blood poured out of its side. I pulled Rona away from it, but she was limp and moaning, and the awful snake-like things were still inside of her. I pulled them out, one by one, but they were sharp and cut my hands, and they came out of her body covered in red blood. When I had freed her, I took her up and grabbed my spear and slid down the side of the rock and stumbled through the blackness until I found a ridge of rock to hide behind. There were a few bits of fire left on top of the rock. They soon went out. I was in total darkness, except for the stars above, clinging to Rona, who made no more sound. I waited there in the utter blackness. Rona did not stir. I felt the warmth slowly flow from her body. By the time the first gray light of morning came, she was dead. As soon as I could see well enough, I went back up to the top of the large rock. The thing was lying there, its wings spread wide and coated with black blood. It had bled enough to cover the entire top of the rock with blackness, which had dried and become thin flakes that blew away in the wind after I stepped on them. With my spear gripped tight, I approached it again. Its body was the same sort of pale color as the morning sky. It was covered in tiny glistening hairs. The mouth was like a spider's, with sharp black teeth. Its cock had become just a shriveled little thing, no sign of the long snake-like parts. I went down the rock again to where I had left the crone. She was gone. My belt lay in the dust, sawed in half. Maybe it was just as well. I did not want to see her again. I called for Charm and Grey Scruff, but there was no sign of them. I left the evil rocky land as fast as I could. The weird rocks all looked the same to me, and I did not know the way well. But I found the river before the sun had climbed to its highest. It was a different part of the river than I had left, and nobody was there. I made my way along the banks, looking for the people. There is much to tell them. Would the other winged strangers soon try to set upon the people? Would we have to make war against them? If it must be so, then let them come. They could be killed like any other men. The sun was still above the trees when I first saw men walking along the river. Their faces were the normal color of sandy river mud, not the evil white of the winged stranger. I called to them happily, called the names of the fathers, but they did not answer. I came closer and saw that these were not the people. I took my spear in both hands. These men were painted backs. They stood silently by the river, their war spears in hand, signs of victory and triumph painted on their chests in bright blood. They watched me with strange, filmy eyes. It's really difficult for me to tell a story with just words, so please bear with me. I am trying to tell you the story of who I am and how I came to be this thing. But I have trouble organizing my thoughts into a single linear flow. I wish I could just show you the entire story all at once in all its many dimensions. Then I could make it clear why I hired somebody to put a pellet of poison into my own arm. But as it is, I must use the ancient art of written narrative. So here it goes. Imagine spending your whole life in a cramped, stinking prison cell, counting the days, scratching tally marks on the walls, and then one day, that big iron door creaks open, and you're whisked off to a glamorous party full of beautiful people and delightful games, and everybody you meet is toasting you for being a genius, for being the great hope of the human race. That's what it's like to plug into the direct sense feeds after living at the children's home. I can't describe that first day in the feed realm. Though I have not cried in 24 years, I still get the ghostly feeling of tears coming to my eyes every time I think about it. To be looking around at the home field environment, everything glittering in a new way, shining in colors that do not exist. All of it stretching out before me, all the main gateways open and waiting to be explored. The feeling of that moment, of being a small child looking out at the beautiful new vastness of the realm, was the most magical thing I have experienced. What I want to impress upon you is this. Every step I took towards slavery felt like a newfound freedom. At first, it was just games and social mixing with other kids. We all had played the mysterious Children of the Forest game and scored highly on it. The game had been an entry exam of sorts. It turns out that I had scored higher than anyone else. A lot higher. This made some of the other kids jealous, but most of them seemed to look up to me. I had never made anyone jealous before, and I had never been looked up to before. Social mixing and share streaming was easy and fun. If you had time to think of what to say, which video or Annie to post to the stream, which paste to link up, it was so much more exciting than being in real life. I had a good memory and could work the assisted recall pretty well, so I made a lot of friends. They told us we would all be going to Harvard and Stanford and Tsinghua, that we would be famous mixed stars and government stars, that we were the future of the world. To be fair, they couldn't have known that most of us would be dead before we were 20, that all of us would be dead before 34. But they knew damn well we wouldn't be going on to normal lives. We were a part of an experiment. After we got used to the feed realm, they began the conditioning. I realize that you might not know what the feed realm is, so maybe I should explain a little bit about it. The feed realm is basically just another interface for sharing information and carrying out transactions. It is based on the metaphor of 3D space. That's why it's called a realm. You can move through it, you can go up and down, left and right. It feels like swimming through weightlessness. They made it this way because that's how human minds work. Our brains evolved to exist in a 3D space. We naturally imagine things as existing in space, even abstract, non-spatial things. We think of the future as coming towards us, the past as receding behind us. Powerful people are considered above, and the powerless are below. Items belong in some categories and outside other categories. Some of these spatial relationships really exist, but they are useful metaphors because our minds are suited to process things in 3D space. It has always been theoretically possible, even trivial, to create a 4-dimensional or n-dimensional feed realm. But since the human mind isn't made to process so many dimensions, it was considered pointless. But recently, a genetic mutation dating back to the Stone Age was discovered, which allows certain individuals to experience and comprehend feed realms of 4 and higher spatial dimensions. While this mutation may have been useless for Stone Age people living in a spatially 3D world, it was also harmless, so it somehow survived, though its initial origin is something of a mystery. Anyways, now scientists were able to hook people up to 4D feed realms. Early test subjects described the experience in terms ranging from nauseating to utterly horrifying. It was theorized that maybe if children were conditioned from a young age to exist in a higher dimensional environment, they would become accustomed to it. But such conditioning was deemed unethical. Enter the CIA. Their motto: where ethical approbation ends, our work begins. They used their global genetic database to identify children with a genotype and collected a group of them to begin conditioning. And that brings us back to my story. At first, we were just playing around in the feed realm, getting used to it. Then, they started the conditioning. How do I describe higher dimensional space? So-called hyperspace. Nauseating and utterly horrifying are exactly what it felt like at first. Everybody hated it. We cried and tried to run away when they made us go into the hyper realm. But of course, there was nowhere to run. We were all lying in hygiene beds, where almost all of us would lie until death. They forced us back into the hyper realm, a little at a time, just showing us simple shapes at first to acclimate us. But how do I describe it? It was like watching things pass through each other, but without touching each other or covering each other up, in ways that made the brain go, "That's impossible. Stop it." There were plain gray boxes and cones and infinite planes and bottomless abysses, and the shapes would move slowly along and do things that were simply impossible. Some of the kids never got used to it. They hated it and dropped out of the program and disappeared from the feed realm. But I kept going. Just like in the Children of the Forest game, I got used to 4 dimensions, then 5, then 6. I was a leader. I taught the other kids tricks for how to understand what they were seeing. And it was cool being in hyperspace. Seeing everything at once like that. Was hyperspace mind-bending? Sure. But not nearly as mind-bending as hypertime. And not nearly as horrifying. A friend from rehab invites me to an HA meeting. Shooting boy was never among my vices, but I go with him. The meeting is out in the suburbs and is packed. Every bit of floor space is filled with folding chairs, and every chair is filled. I want to leave as soon as I sit down. It's like being in a crowded elevator for an entire hour. I can feel the coffee breath on my skin. It is disturbing to look around at all the kids in the room. How are they all so young and fresh-faced? The alcoholics tend to be much more beat up. All those years of excess capillary dilation give our faces a meaty quality. These little heroin addicts, on the other hand, come into the rooms at 19 with the glow of childhood still on their skin. My friend's arms have no track marks. They are smooth and doll-like. No major veins left. He is 21. I've been roommates with kids like these for the past few months. They don't know who Norm from Cheers is. They don't know how to empty a dryer filter or take care of a Teflon pan. But they know how to cook up black tar. They know how to find veins. It quickly becomes apparent that one of the meeting's regulars died last night. Everyone is upset. People start crying. My desire to not be there grows exponentially. I didn't know the kid. I feel like I've stumbled into the wrong funeral. The kid's sponsor talks. He's an older man with a gray goatee. He was guiding the kid through the steps. The room looks at him to say something comforting, something with a ring of authority and wisdom. The room is full of children in the grips of a problem that their parents cannot understand. Here is a grown-up who can understand. He talks about meeting the kid's parents at the hospital. His eyes grow damp. He recalls, haltingly, that the parents were very polite. They thanked him very politely for trying to help their son. He looks down at the floor. There is no more to say. Later, I relate the story to my roommate, Sean. He says that this has been going on with the blacks for years, but nobody cared until it came to swallow up all the little white children. He says that most problems come to visit black people first, because black people are God's chosen people. They must be chastised. The program tells us to be more open-minded and less judgmental. I am trying to be more open-minded and less judgmental about Sean's beliefs. At first glance, his beliefs are paranoid, ahistorical, conspiracy theory hogwash. At second glance, they are appallingly anti-Semitic, cultural appropriation. But my sponsor says it's not my place to enlighten him with my views. I only need to be a decent roommate to him. When the Jews were sold into captivity, their narrative survived. This was not so for the slaves of America. At least, nothing like the Torah was passed on. The American system of slavery worked to destroy the history of millions of people. But I wonder, how much of the Jews' history really survived? There are certainly parts of the Torah that don't have the resounding ring of authority and wisdom, e.g., the talking snake, or the talking bush, or the Nephilim, or 90% of everything else. How much of the real story actually survived? It must be tempting to place oneself into the context of a mythical narrative that goes back thousands of years, that extends forward to the end of history, instead of just being this lost little individual, you become the inheritor of a grand spiritual legacy, part of a grand struggle, one of the chosen people. A new roommate moved into the house a few days ago. His name is Donnie. He's in his mid-40s, and he's a former Marine. I show him the Iwo Jima segment of my story and ask him what he thinks.